And with us tonight, the former Education Secretary who chose to leave the Cabinet in the January reshuffle rather than take a different job, the Conservative MP Justine Greening. The Labour MP John Mann, who voted in favour of Brexit and who thinks Jeremy Corbyn may not lead Labour into the next election. The Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Business and Equalities Minister in David Cameron's coalition government, Jo Swinson. An economist and former advisor to Ed Miliband, who came to this country as an asylum seeker fleeing the war in Liberia, Miatta Fanbula. And the columnist and writer for the Daily Telegraph and the Catholic Herald, Tim Stanley. Good, thanks very much. Remember, at home, of course, if you want to take issue with what's being said here, hashtag BBCQT on Twitter, on Facebook, and you can engage in the debate. Let's have our first question. Amanda Byrne, let's have your question, please.
Are Theresa May's days numbered, and who is fit to take her place?
Are Theresa May's days? Tim Stanley.
Yes, I think they are. And I would listen to the growing chorus among MPs and the growing feeling that she hasn't quite got what it takes to see this country through to a very successful Brexit, and a Brexit which seizes all the opportunities that come with it. I'll put my cards on the table. I'm a Brexiteer. I supported her. When she said Brexit means Brexit, that was good enough for me. But we have seen the last year that she didn't really believe in it. There was a basic tragedy. Brexiteers won the referendum, but they lost the Tory leadership election. And the Tory party was taken over, and the government was taken over by someone who saw Brexit not as an opportunity, but as a risk that they had to guide the country through. And that lost momentum in the general election. It lost the Tories their majority. It led to a very, very poor performance at the conference. And increasingly, there is growing disquiet among MPs that she simply hasn't got what it takes to see the country through this. Now, her counter-argument is, precisely because the arithmetic in Parliament is so close, you need someone like her who can swim between the soft and the hard options of Brexit, someone who just simply isn't as offensive as either alternative. But that's not the right approach to take towards Brexit. You don't just chase a consensus in this country, you try and build one. And I'm afraid that everything we've discovered in the last year is that Theresa May simply doesn't have the political skills necessary to explain Brexit to people and to achieve the best outcome from it.
Justine Greening, you had a run-in with her just last month. What do you think?
I think she's got an incredibly challenging job as Prime Minister, and I think people need to get behind her. This is it's a unique time for our country. People want a Prime Minister that will steer us through this period of uncertainty, but I'm afraid those soundings off that we hear just make that harder, frankly. So I think people need to get behind her. And I think that we need to remember, frankly, and I've been in Parliament for 12 years, that whether it was Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, people like John Major before my time, there are always going to be MPs that will run off to the papers and badmouth a PM. That's part of the territory of the job. But frankly, I think we need to get behind her and support her doing an incredibly important job on behalf of our country.
The obvious question to ask then is, if you feel that strongly, why didn't you accept what she offered you and stay in the Cabinet to support her from inside government?
Because in the end, for me, it was not about having a job. I didn't come into politics in terms of whether I had a role or not. I came into politics because I care passionately that it shouldn't matter where you're growing up in this country, you have the same equal opportunities to make the most of yourself. That's what I was able to pursue in the Department for Education, but I've been very clear, frankly, that you can do that from outside government as well. This is
But if you were supporting the Prime Minister, if you feel she's in difficulty, if you feel Brexit's a big problem, if you feel everybody should be behind her, you didn't do your bit by publicly refusing to do what she asked you to do.
I think
That's
in
the question.
I don't agree with that at all, and actually there was no rancour whatsoever between myself and the Prime Minister.
No, it's not the rancour between her and the Prime Minister, it's the public image of you refusing to do what she wanted, like the Secretary of State for Health refused to do what she wanted. It gave exactly the impression of a Prime Minister who wasn't completely in control.
I do not agree that a Member of Parliament that comes into Parliament in order to achieve things for their community and their country and puts that, frankly, ahead of any particular role. I'd done 4 ministerial roles. I could have had a 5th ministerial role, a 4th role in Cabinet, but that's not what I was interested in doing. And frankly, I could have put that first, but I preferred to continue working on the issues that I think matter to this country. And dare I say, David, as well, I think for all of the debate that we're having on Brexit, the sorts of fundamental challenges around the fact that where you grow up still determines how well you can do in life, those challenges absolutely need to be confronted and dealt with. And part of the problem in government is people do get moved around, and that is one of the reasons why we never have the kind of stickability on this sort of policy to really see it through. And I am prepared to be somebody who takes a decision about seeing through the fact that we have to become a country where there's equality of opportunity for all of our young people, wherever they're growing up.
Miatta Van Buller, you've worked in Downing Street, you've worked for Blair, you worked for Brown, you've seen what it's like from the inside. Do you think her days are numbered as Prime Minister?
Look, I don't think it's for me to say whether Theresa May should stay or not. I think it's a decision for her. And
it's a question for observation, whether you think she's...
Well, and those within her party that may or may not nudge her out. You know, but for me, actually, the real tragedy in all of this is that I remember her speech on the streets of Downing Street, and I remember her talking to the country, talking about the struggles that people were facing, talking about the fact that, you know, the people she called the just about managing, the fact that actually they were struggling to make ends meet, struggling to, pay their bills. The prospects for their kids weren't getting better, and I was quite encouraged by that. And I think the real frustration is that she has absolutely failed to tackle any of those issues. And time again, she talks the talk, and then when it comes to actually acting, she completely bottles it. So on housing, on social mobility, on pay, the rhetoric has just not matched up to the reality. So, you know, if she wants to stay, if she wants to lead the country, if she wants to govern the country, then fine. But, you know, get on with it. Lead, govern, take action.
All right. I'll come back to the panel in a moment. The man in spectacles up there, what do you think?
You've come to Grantham this evening, the home of Margaret Thatcher. She once said, "I don't mind how much my ministers talk, so long as they do what I say." Would even Margaret Thatcher have been able to leave a Conservative party that don't know whether they want Brexit or Brino?
And what do you think?
I think she would have had difficulty with the party as it is at the moment.
OK, and you, sir, there?
I think the main problem she's got is she's not delivering a clear message about Brexit. Nobody in Europe understands what she wants.
Yes.
The British people voted. We know what we want. We want control of immigration, control of our own laws, and we want to work with Europe, but we don't want to be dictated by Europe. Europe's become a dictatorship.
OK. But we may come to a bit of that later, but do you think her days are numbered as Prime Minister?
No, if she comes out with a clear message and whips them all into line and follow her, she needs to come out and tell them what we want, because they don't know what we want. They know what they want. They want our money, and they want to keep us on the sort of strings that we're on at the minute. They're not going to give us anything. Okay. They're going to give us as little as they can get away with and take as much money as they can.
John Mann.
I feel sorry for her. I mean, she is an ardent Remainer. Ardent. And she hasn't changed her view on that. One of the ironies is, of course, that Jeremy has always been very Euro-sceptical. So you've got this ardent Remainer trying to push through what the people have rightly, in my view, voted for, but whether she thinks it's right or not, that's the mandate that we have as politicians. And the vultures are now circling around a Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, with the media running around demanding answers from him. So let's see whether he gives answers, whether he remains. She's accident-prone. However, I think her weakness is actually her strength in terms of staying on. The Tory party's terrified of getting rid of her. They know what will happen if there's an election in the foreseeable future. They will lose. And they're absolutely terrified, therefore, of her going. None of them have got the bottle to get rid of her. They all want a brief against, they all want rid of her, they all think she's no good. That actually, in the real political world, is her strength in surviving.
But you're not much better for Jeremy Corbyn, are you? Because you're always saying he's too old, or he won't make it through.
Now, David, if you believe everything you read in the Daily Mail...
I'm reading from the Jewish...
You should be better prepared than that.
OK, don't try that game on me. I'm reading what you said on the 27th of January to the Jewish Labour Movement Conference. The next election in 2022, by which stage, I hope you're blushing, Jeremy Corbyn will be 73 and facing the prospect of being Prime Minister at 78. So I don't think he'll be doing it.
Yeah, and it wasn't in January, that was in September. It was the 3rd of September, and it was in response to a question of, do you think he'll be there or not? And my view is that politicians are finding it harder and harder to continue. I certainly don't intend to be there at the age of 75, but that's his choice, and he'll decide that. No one in the Labour Party is going to be getting rid of him. And when it comes to the election, people are going to be looking at everything else that hasn't happened, as well as the mess that Theresa May's making of Brexit. They're going to be looking at the NHS, they're going to be looking at the economy, they're looking at their own standards of living and coming to a judgment. And I'll tell you, the Tory party is terrified of getting rid of her, and therefore, actually, I think the likelihood of her being got rid of by them in the next year is virtually nil.
OK.
They'll keep her because of her weakness.
The woman in the fourth row there.
She's a woman with an impossible task, because it's impossible to get a good Brexit. Under the government's own analysis on the best case scenario, the 700,000 job losses, that's what we're facing. It's absolutely nonsense. It's not nonsense. That is the government's own analysis that was leaked recently, yes, because they are too scared to bring it out in the open. David Davis, he lied. He lied about the government's own analysis. It was there. He did not bring it out.
All right.
He should not be in government.
Joe
700,000.
Joe Swinson.
Well, to answer Amanda's initial question, are Theresa May's days numbered? Undoubtedly, yes, because there's a very simple truth, which is the Conservative Party is not going to let Theresa May fight another election. But I would just say be careful what you wish for. Because the lady in the audience just now has said about what David Davis did. I think he misled Parliament about these impact assessments. He said were there in excruciating detail. We've got Boris Johnson, who can't even read his brief when the life of a British woman in an Iranian jail depends on it. And we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, who used to be something of a sort of funny anomaly and now is a frightening prospect with really extreme views. The basic truth is, as various people have pointed out, the Tory party will not be led on Europe. Every previous Conservative Party leader has struggled to lead the Conservative Party in Europe, and Theresa May is struggling to lead the Tory Party in Europe. And the tragedy is that it would be a sort of sideshow if they were just squabbling over there and it didn't matter. But the future of the country depends on it. This is the most complicated, huge change that this country is facing for decades, and we need a government that is up to the job. I think what the Tory party is doing is self-indulgent, and the country deserves better.
But hang on. So, Joe, just to clarify, the country voted Brexit. You didn't. No. You criticised the Prime Minister. Presumably you'd like her, from what you've just said, to be an ardent Brexiteer.
No, what I'm saying
because
is...
Because that would be doing what the country wanted.
I think it would... I think, actually, if we look at the result, there was a 52-48 split. What you saw was a very divided country. What you have not seen is a government that is determined to bring people together. What you've not seen is a government that said, here was a very close result, the country voted to leave, so let's try to respect that result and to leave, but in a way that also respects the wishes of the 48% of people that voted to remain in the European Union. Okay. And that's not been the approach of this government. They've gone for the most extreme Brexit possible, and it's going to really damage the
let's
country.
just stick. We'll come to Brexit, and I will come to you when we come to Brexit, but let's just talk about the leadership of the Tory party. Who do you want to see lead the Tory party since you want her to go?
By the way, some people might have found my tone in my first answer somewhat difficult and harsh, but I feel one has to be, precisely because whenever one discusses Theresa May, words like sympathy come up. And that is what is keeping her in place.
What makes you think anybody thought you were being harsh?
Because I don't like saying it myself.
Well,
because I respect the woman. I respect her because I think it's taken a remarkable degree of personal
Well, what I asked you is who you...
Yes.
Well, leaving that aside, who do you want to see replace her?
Whoever it is, they must be someone who is capable of leading the country towards the opportunities that Brexit offer. Therefore, I support a Brexiteer. It might be Boris Johnson. And precisely because you react that way, it might not be Boris Johnson. Because I can tell you that if I had said that in front of a group of Tory MPs, I probably would have heard exactly the same noises. And far from being an extremist, if you look at Paddy Power and you look at Ladbrokes, the Tory currently, which is the bookies' favourite to take her from Theresa May, is Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, it's frightening. It's frightening.
And that is because he is intelligent, he is civil, and he's prepared to do something Theresa May will not do, which is make the case for the Tory party on the basis of the philosophy of the liberty of the individual. Why are we not hearing that? We're in Grantham. Let's have some Thatcherism back.
All right. The man in spectacles there.
I think this is a vanity project on the part of certain MPs. There's been cabinet departures, there's always leadership contests. I think people are just getting fed up, and Parliament needs to stop acting like some sort of grotesque house of cards and do what it's supposed to do.
And what would that be?
Just scrutinise legislation instead of going weak and constantly throwing people out. Let's scrutinise legislation properly.
It's doing exactly that.
All right, the man over there on the side there, and then I come over here. You, sir.
A change of leadership of this country at such a crucial time would be disastrous for the Brexit negotiations. I think the Prime Minister could have taken the easy option last year of resigning, as David Cameron did after the referendum result, but she has hung on. She must be committed to Brexit because I don't think anybody would want to put themselves through that personal trauma of leading the country through it. I think she's committed. I think the country needs to support her and get behind her to bring that best possible deal back for this country.
All right, and you, sir, over there, one last point.
I'm really sorry, but Theresa May came into the job because no Brexiteer stood in a Tory party leadership election after David Cameron resigned. They all fell by the wayside and gave her a clear run at it because they knew that it was a poisoned chalice because that party will never unite behind someone on Europe.
OK. Thank you. I think what we'll do at this stage is to move on to the next question, which is pertinent to all of this. Just before we do, I have to say where we're going to be next week is Darlington, the week after that in Yeovil, Darlington, then Yeovil, on the screen, how to apply. But let's keep this theme going and have this question from Lisa O'Neill, please.
When will Remainers realise that our Brexit decision was always much more than about the economy?
So this goes in the light of these figures that were released this week to the heart of what the whole thing is about. Justin Greening.
I think that what's important now is we actually find a broad settlement on Brexit that can work not necessarily for the ardent Remainers, I don't think that's ever going to be possible, or indeed for the people who are right on the hard edge of a hard Brexit. I think we've got to find something that actually most people in our country feel is a sensible approach. And I agree, it's not just about the economy and jobs. That's absolutely vital, and we need to bear that in mind. But it's about the links we've got between people in our country and people in the rest of Europe. And I represent a very young constituency based in London, and we have to make Brexit work for young people. And, of course, many of them did not vote for this. But I think if we... And so what I'm saying, sir, is that if we want to actually get a sustainable Brexit, then we're going to have some give and take, and we're going to have to find a way of approaching Brexit that genuinely can bring...
As extreme. Brexit is Brexit. It's not difficult to understand. It's Brexit. Don't tell us, and I'm fed up of hearing this from politicians, don't tell us that those ardent Brexiteers, we just want Brexit. It means getting out of the single market, governing ourselves, controlling our borders. This is not rocket science. It's called Brexit.
But it needs to be...
Where is it? You've heard this talk about what Theresa May's up to, whether there should be a change. What's going wrong from your point of view in the way that the government's handling it?
I completely agree with Tim, and I have to say, Justine, I would almost always agree with you when you say get behind the Prime Minister. This is not the time to get behind a lame duck who does not believe in Brexit. We need to get rid of her now, get someone in that believes in it, and fight for this country.
OK. Do you want to reply to that?
I would just reiterate the point I made, which is if we want a Brexit that is going to stick for the long term, it has to be a Brexit that works for the broad population, and it absolutely has to work for young people growing up in our country, and they do care about jobs. It is going to be about housing. It is going to be about their ability to still feel like they're part of a broader Europe that, frankly, we will remain part of purely because of geography as much as anything else, and they want it handled sensibly and pragmatically and not ideologically.
All right. John Mann, what do you make of these figures that came out this week about the damage that Brexit would do to the economy and all that? Do you agree with the man over there that people are failing to realise that Brexit is more than about the economy? It's about something more important?
Well, David, I'm kind of the nerd's nerd in Parliament, because I've been on the Treasury Committee longer than anyone in the history of the world. And
of the world?
Extraordinary. It's my one claim to fame.
How many years is that?
What that means, that's about 10 years.
The history of the
world.
world.
And what that means is, well, Treasury Committee is not that old, but no. I get to scrutinise these reports all the time, constantly. And at the base of the so-called problems is the Treasury's logic on how the economy works. And the fundamental difference between the different models, these secret models, is how much net migration, i.e. immigration, is coming into the country. Because the Treasury's model is based on poverty if you don't have immigration. And what they've done is they've scaled down their estimate, because of Brexit, of the numbers of new people coming in. They scaled it from 1.2 million down to 800,000, and some are suggesting it'll be lower than that. 800,000 more people coming into the country in the next 5 years. And what they're concluding, therefore, is that will damage the economy. I say that their logic on the economy is fundamentally wrong. And the reason for that is because the idea that you boost an economy simply by bringing more and more people into the labour market is flawed. And there's a report out today on robotics which says how many jobs we're going to lose by robots. Actually, if we were the first country to take advantage of the freedoms we've got and build up that industry, and actually let's have lots of robots doing the jobs, but not replacing people, but building productivity,
so the idea,
building wealth. So the Treasury model is what is behind every single one of these estimates.
So just to interrupt you, this figure that if we were under WTO rules, the economy will be 8% lower, the growth in the economy 8% lower over the next 15 years. You dispute, that's the figure you dispute.
I dispute the Treasury model. The Treasury model is based on trade and it's based on net migration inwards. And it's been argued about in the Treasury Committee over the years. They overestimated grossly what the problems would be immediately after the referendum.
Let's just hear
it totally wrong. Okay. They're getting it totally wrong again. What we should be doing is joining together as a country in what the advantages are. We ought to be looking into the fourth industrial revolution of how we can protect, as the Americans did in Silicon Valley, their new industries, where we can build high skills, not cheap labour, low skills, which is the way we've gone. We've taken the easy option. This is the big opportunity that we now have, a high-skilled economy,
I have to
protecting
stop you there.
those new industries. And that's what we should go for.
Miata.
So, look, John, these impact assessments, all they do is that they look at the information that we have available to us and they make an assessment of what they think is likely to happen. And quite frankly, I think for most people, they're not surprised that Brexit's going to have a knock-on effect to the economy. I don't think there's anyone that thinks it's not going to have a knock-on effect to the economy. And so for me, you know, the bigger issue, and to sort of take the question that Lisa asked, yes,
Sorry, when you say knock-on effect, obviously going to have a knock-on effect, a deleterious or a
negative
beneficial?
knock-on effect. And I don't think there's anyone that thinks it's not going to have a negative knock-on effect. And certainly all the work that we've done at the New Economics Foundation supports that. So that, I don't...
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, but we have not left the European Union. We have not left the European Union.
Sorry, what was the remark? In the referendum...
The Economists for Free Trade have published figures with some eminent economists behind them who've been very correct with economic forecasts over the past 30 years that are predicting the opposite of what these Treasury reports are saying. They're saying it would be positive on WTO terms.
All right, yes.
So I think the majority of economic analysis suggests that there will be a negative knock-on impact, certainly in the short term, and then I think there's a question about the long term, because there are lots of different factors that come into play. But to go back to Lisa's question, there were lots of different reasons why people voted to leave the European Union, all of them legitimate. But, you know, for a lot of people, you know, they voted to leave because, quite frankly, they were sick and tired of the state of the economy. They were fed up with seeing their pay packages squeezed. They were tired of the housing crisis. They were worried about the prospect of their children. And I think in all of this, we've got to hold on to that. And it is absolutely beholden on the politicians to ask themselves the question, when they're dealing with things like Brexit or some of the really complex tech issues like the single market or the customs union, will it make it easier or will it make it harder to improve our living standards, to create jobs for us, to make things better for our young people? That has to be the litmus test of all of this. And my big worry is that we leave the European Union and actually it doesn't solve all those problems, not least because we will have a decade where the politicians and the government are dealing with the ins and outs of Brexit and they're not focusing on these massive, massive challenges that we absolutely must deal with.
Let me hear from the woman there.
So the gentleman over there just said, why do people, reduce people down to hardline Brexiteers? And exactly why the thing that you just said, you think that everything's so simple and straightforward, and it's not. And the issues of why people voted for Brexit are, as the lady just said, far more complicated and more to do with our own internal domestic politics and policies that aren't going to change overnight the day after we leave the European Union.
What's your feeling about the way that it's being negotiated at the moment?
I think it's embarrassing. I think it's really embarrassing,
Why?
It's just a waste of time. It feels like it's just such a waste of time. There are far bigger problems in our society that we should be focusing on. We talked about the housing crisis. We talked about the productivity issues that we've got. And Brexit just seems to be this big sidetrack that's kind of been manufactured by the media and some really angry people on social media.
All right.
And actually...
Joe,
the EU isn't the problem.
I won't come to you straight, Joe, because you've been nodding in agreement with that point. Let me go to Tim Stanley. Perhaps you would like to pick up that point.
I don't think it's just about what's going on social media. The choice is so big and important. When it comes to the Treasury's forecast, don't forget this is the same Treasury that said that just a vote to leave would itself create 500,000 job losses and lead to the economy shrinking by 3.6%. And neither of those things happened. The other problem is the Treasury, a lot of its predictions, which are 15 years hence, by the way, are based upon the assumption that the EU is going to continue to grow. It's enjoying a cyclical upturn at the moment, but that might not last. And even that the EU will survive in the form that it's currently in. We're always talking about predictions of how things will go down in Britain. We make assumptions about the future prosperity of the EU, which I think are unreasonable. But the first question was this primarily about democracy? Yes, you're absolutely right. It's very complicated. Many people had many different reasons as a protest vote about immigration, about free trade. But for me personally, it was about democracy. And what's interesting is we've seen it evolve from a question about the nature of democracy with the EU to a debate about democracy in this country itself. It's so important, I think, for democracy in Britain that the democratic will of the people is implemented. That, to me, is what the discussion has now moved on to, whether or not we can do that.
But how do you define the implementation? Because everybody seems to have a different view about how the vote can be implemented.
Very simply, because there are many different kinds of Brexit, and there are many different ways of going about it.
Precisely.
Very simply,
so how do you define it?
Very simply, that we do indeed leave the EU and restore the ability to make our own laws, and that process is not undermined by anyone. But it's not just a test of that, it's also a test about how we do democracy in this country. I'm really tired of the labelling of hard Brexiteers or Remoaners or things like that. Don't get me wrong, I do it myself sometimes and I regret that, but I'm tired of it.
Keep regretting things you've said.
It would be nice if we could, well, that's because I listen to myself back sometimes, like I'll do later on, and I'm sure I'll cringe all the way through it, but it's so important that we get through this moment in our democracy with civility, and we come out of it from the other side together. Because that's what matters, is that we're in this together and that we respect the decision that was taken and we come out of it a stronger, richer and freer country.
OK. No? The woman in purple, do you want to speak? No. Did you want to speak? Yes. No. The woman in purple, you had your hand up before. Yes.
I mean, Brexiteers are talking about strategies, wars and fights all the time with Europe. I'm European. I wasn't allowed to vote here after living 35 years paying my taxes. My child wasn't able to vote either. This is like a Barcelona referendum. This is an illegal advisory referendum. This is not democracy, and this is a shame of England, which has always been a democratic country to show lead and to show example of a good... So you're always talking about fight, and in fact, the gentleman there is a sample of a vociferous...
Have some manners and let the lady speak, please.
Vociferous argument. You always talk about... Also, it's glamorous to say Brexiteers. Sounds a bit like Musketeers. I'm sick of hearing you are a Brexiteer. I am a Ramona. I'm not a Ramona because I was not allowed to vote.
All right. Jo Swinson.
So, I think the lady makes some very good points there. I think clearly this is about more than just the economy. I absolutely understand that. And I think there's a very straightforward and honest position that says, you know, I want to leave the European Union because I don't like what that means for immigration and for what that means about the sharing of decisions about regulations on trade and so on. And therefore, the most important thing is that we leave the European Union, even though that will have a negative effect on the economy, which is the economic consensus. But that is not what has been and is being said, because instead, people are sort of being painted this sort of vision rather than a hard or soft Brexit. It's a cake and eat it Brexit. It's a total fantasy. It's to say that we can have all of this and the economy won't be impacted, that we can come out of the single market, but nonetheless we'll be able to have the exact same access to it as we do at the moment, but without having to obey with any of the rules that all the other countries in the single market have to abide by. And to peddle that myth to the public, I think, is a dereliction of duty, because what the government is saying they're going to be able to negotiate with our European partners is simply not on the table. And the sooner we get some real honesty and realism into this debate, the better. We cannot have our cake and eat it. There are some hard choices here. It's a perfectly respectable position to say, fair enough, I'd rather just reduce immigration and I'm not so fussed about the economy. But that is the position, and we should be honest about it.
All right. Just before we leave this, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, seemed to be saying today that he didn't think the numbers stacked up. You have to count in the House of Commons, and that the numbers wouldn't stack up for leaving the customs union. Do you think he's right?
I'm not sure he is. I think that's the debate that we'll be having over the coming weeks. And in the end, we are going to have to find a way through this, but we're not going to do it. I think, particularly my view, is by listening to the outer fringes of this discussion. I think you'll find a way through by perhaps listening to the silent centre-ground majority of public opinion in our country. The worst thing that we could have happen to us now is that we leave the EU, we're not happy with that settlement, and then we revisit this all over again in the next 5 to 10 years. And I very much doubt that the younger generation in our country will take 44 years to come to another referendum, like the current generation perhaps has done. And we can't afford, I agree with you, we can't afford to spend the next 10, 15, 20 years of our lives talking about Brexit. We have to find a sustainable approach, make sure it works, and get on to fixing some of these more underlying challenges that can unlock our country's success in the future.
But George Osborne's point is that the House of Commons, as it's currently constituted, wouldn't allow a clear result of the kind that you're talking about, that there will be problems. What do you think? Do you think he's right, that they won't be able to leave entirely because House of Commons vote against it? A lot of Labour Party wouldn't like to leave the customs union, would they?
I've rarely found George to be right, and when he said there'd have to be an emergency budget immediately after Brexit, it reminded me when he said when he came in as Chancellor that he'd get rid of the debt within one Parliament, and it's going up at £5,000 a second at the moment. So that's George's legacy. So frankly, anything George has to say on the economy needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. He's a journalist now. That's probably where he's best suited to be.
OK. Right, we'll move on. We'll move on. Those of you who had your hands up, I'm sorry. We do talk about this a lot everywhere we go, but we don't want to do the whole programme on it. I'm going to come back to you. You were talking, George Stothard, about something quite different, but you've got the next question as it happens.
Given recent revelations of a series of innocent men being accused of rape and almost losing their liberty, is it time to name and shame false accusers?
This is the case of... I think there are 4 rape cases that have collapsed in recent weeks, and Liam Allen, of course, was the one that was apologies for it going to trial at all. Jo Swinson.
I think we have to be pretty careful in looking at what the justice system actually says. So the fact that a conviction cannot be brought, yes, says under the law that that person is innocent, but it doesn't follow that the person that made the allegation was making it up, because we rightly have a higher standard for taking away someone's liberty and pronouncing them guilty of the crime of rape. It is a high standard to meet. And that basically means that we recognise that there will be some people who did commit the offence, but who walk free to try to prevent the alternative, which would be innocent people being locked up. So I would just be, first of all, very wary about assuming in any circumstance where there is a rape trial and somebody is found innocent that the person who made that complaint in the first place somehow was not doing so genuinely. And I think also that the number of false accusations of people who are, making an accusation when it didn't actually happen is very, very small. Obviously, some of these cases make it into the media, but it is important that we keep that in perspective and also remember the other side of the problem here, which is only a tiny proportion of the women and indeed men who are raped in this country. It ever reaches trial in the first place. There's a huge problem of underreporting, and because it is very difficult to secure a conviction, we recognise that many people will not get justice. So, I have huge sympathy with anybody that goes through the experience where they have not committed a crime and they go through that whole trial experience, and in particular if they have actually then been convicted of something, and there are serious questions that need to be asked in the criminal justice system about this. But we also need to make sure that we keep a balanced approach and recognise that there are very, very many victims of sexual crimes who do not get justice.
You, sir.
I think that picking up on your point, although it's important to look at when they're falsely accused, that is only about 3 to 4% of all cases. And like you just said, when you actually look and you break down as to why they didn't get to a decision, a lot of it is coming down to the evidence that is actually brought to the case. So why not make that the important point that you're talking about? The evidence that's brought to people and how the justice system can make a decision on that. And it kind of makes a broader point. How, as the public, can we trust the justice system to make a decision with what is actually come of in the past couple of weeks? We've seen cases where evidence is just come up randomly 2 years down the line, 15 months, 16 months down the line. How is that possibly ever happened? How is that even a thing? How can we trust in that case?
And the woman there in red, yes.
I think any questions around this issue of rape need to be looked at in the context of the subjugation of women over thousands of years. It's taken us a long time to get to the point where rape is even recognised as a crime, including within marriage. So we need to support women and create an environment where women feel able to go to the authorities when something like that happens. Yes, there are the occasional cases of false accusations actually leading to imprisonment, but these numbers are absolutely tiny, and it's our responsibility to overweight the experience of the women in these
And you
cases.
don't think if there is proven false accusation that should lead to the naming of the false accuser?
No, because I think it creates an environment where it's even more difficult for women. Having the progress that we've made to get to this point is going to be undone if women feel that their accusations aren't going to be believed, and if that person doesn't get the conviction, that they could then be publicly named. It's just going to go.
All right. I'll come to you later on. Justin Greening.
I think it's absolutely a step too far to name and shame false accusers. I agree with the point the lady just made. I mean, these are actually quite rare in relation to the broader challenges I think we face on sexual violence, which is making sure that women, and indeed men, victims feel they can come forward and talk to the police in the first place. And I think as MPs, we do deal with people who've been victims of sexual violence. And so it's actually the reporting, from my perspective, that's the biggest issue, combined then with making sure that victims get their day in court, but actually that process is handled effectively by the police and the prosecution service as well, so that they know when they get an outcome, it's genuinely the right one. And I do think, of course, we need to be fair to all parties in this case, but I think the issues we've seen recently are deeply, deeply concerning. This is probably one of the most traumatic crimes that can be committed against anyone, any woman, and it's vital that it's handled effectively.
Okay, the man there.
You mentioned women mainly, but men do get raped too. And the problem is, men are more afraid to talk about it. And if you're willing to lie and possibly put a man's life on the line to go to prison for something he didn't do, I think that's just disgusting. You deserve to go to prison. Because if you're going to take someone else's life away, you should have yours taken as well.
Tim Stanley.
The Crown Prosecution Service is obviously trying to address a serious problem, which is the low conviction rate for rape. So, reading between the lines, it's put a great deal of pressure on to try to get the conviction rate up. That's a good thing. The problem is that it seems to relate to some mistakes when it comes to procedure. And the reason why a number of trials, high-profile trials, have recently collapsed is because crucial evidence has not been submitted and has not been made available. That is a procedural mistake, and it has not only embarrassed the police and the CPS, but it also undermines people's faith in the justice system. It undermines not just those who are hurt by that, and it's very hard to think of something worse than being accused of such a dreadful crime and having to carry that around for the rest of your life, the stigma never quite going away because people say they feel like it doesn't. But it also undermines the confidence of women and men who have been assaulted to bring an accusation because they see trials collapsing and it makes them less likely to bring the accusation.
And what about the question?
So the answer is therefore, but I feel that's slightly separate from the issue of the correct presentation of evidence. The question is, do you name and shame? I don't like the concept of naming and shaming, precisely for the reasons Joe's laid out. But it might be time to withhold the names of people who are accused. As a journalist, if I can very quickly explain, traditionally journalists don't support that, partly because we have learned through what we cover that when an accusation goes public, it encourages other women and men to come forward and can help to bring an eventual successful prosecution. But I fear the sheer number of people who have been falsely accused or the accusation has collapsed, it feels like an injustice is being done in the pursuit of justice, and that's not right.
The woman here. The woman in the front here.
Hiya. Currently, there is at least 2 to 3 women per week who are killed by their ex-partners or current partners. They've usually sustained decades of abuse, sexual and violent abuse. Where is the people that are dealing with that situation? These women are dying where nobody is even addressing the situation. There's been a big quilt been made to try and commemorate these women because their names are being lost. They should not be lost. They should be, their cases should be taken up and they should be remembered, and we should be making sure that these cases do not happen anymore.
All right. John Mann.
There is a moral dilemma with this. There was a man called Savile, and until clear allegations were made against him, lots of people didn't come forward. And when they did, vast numbers of people, including some of my constituents, came forward. Now I'm representing a large number of survivors of childhood sexual abuse in the independent inquiry. I was at the hearing, sat alongside all the other QCs. I'm not a QC. I'm representing people who've never had any justice. I'm representing people who will not go to the police because they don't want their name making public. I'm talking to someone tomorrow who hasn't told their own family. I meet people in my constituency office who've never told anybody and come and tell me and say, what are you going to do about it? How can you help? And in this, what I'm seeing, I don't disbelieve any of these people. I hear the horrific, grotesque things that have destroyed their lives. I see with some of them are incapable of properly speaking to me because of the things that have happened. And they're the ones who haven't killed themselves. That is part of what's not been discussed properly in this country. And so there is a dilemma, of course there is. I've dealt with people where actually they're not sure when they were a tiny child who raped them. And sometimes I'm fearful that they're looking for a name, and if they think they've got a name, they'd like to get justice. But actually what they know is that somebody raped them repeatedly when they were small and destroyed their lives. That's part of the problem that the police and the prosecution service have got. I tell you, I've been dealing with this for about 4 years now. It's not what I expected to do as an MP. I have seen a significant improvement in how the police and how Crown prosecution understand these issues, but it's only just come in the last year or so.
And coming to the question that George over there asked, is it time to name and shame false accusers? You would not be sympathetic to that.
No, I wouldn't as well. You know, I'm asked repeatedly, will you name and shame some of the MPs who are suspected of child abuse, or some of the MPs who have sexually assaulted and not been named other people who are still in Parliament? I'd love to do it, but I think that's fundamentally wrong.
All right.
And I don't think that's my remit or anyone else's remit to do that. I think we've got to stay within the justice system we've got, but also provide far more support that encourages more people. It is men as well as women. It's primarily women, vast numbers of women. If I'm representing over 30 people of my constituents, would you come to me? Why would you come to me? Imagine how many more people are out there and no one's representing them. It's one of the biggest issues this country's not got its head round yet.
The woman there.
There seems to be a theme emerging throughout the way this topic is going. There's a fault at the investigation stage with the police. There seems to be a massive issue happening here. Like a woman said down there, there's women dying because police aren't taking it seriously. There's men and women who are going to the police for help, and like you said, they're being named and shamed. Yeah, they can say, yeah, their names can't be mentioned while the case is happening, but there's communities. On social media, we have like a social media group for our local town. Someone's name gets put on there, it's tarnished. The police need to have some kind of thing in process, like when they're putting images on of people on the internet where they're the most vulnerable. They've got like things in place to punish people for that. They can't do that anymore. Putting vulnerable images up of people on the internet, they are punished for that. People need to be punished in the communities for bringing up people's names before it's even been found out if they are guilty or not. There's faults with the police. That's where it's happening at the moment, and that needs to be sorted out.
Okay. And the man there on the gangway there, or the woman there, I can't see it. Yes. Yes, you, sorry.
We can't start naming and shaming because we'll just have gangs of vigilantes. As soon as somebody's named or their picture goes up on social media, they'll yeah. So
all right. Let me go back to the questioner. What do you make? I'll come to you in a moment, Miatta. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
Well,
are you convinced by the arguments
I agree
you've
totally
heard?
with Tim. I think if men's names and reputations get dragged through the press, and that shouldn't happen until they're found guilty. And there is now in this era, I think this era of witch hunting, a man now is actually guilty until proven innocent. And so I think, let's stop naming men. If we're going to protect women who make false accusations, then at least protect men until they're guilty.
Miatta.
So, look, I agree with a lot of the points that have been made, and I do think, actually, the key issue here is the rape of both men and women has been underreported, and actually for a really long time it wasn't taken seriously enough. And so the priority has to be to create the conditions so people feel that they can come forward and it will be taken seriously and it will be investigated. And the worry with naming and shaming and everything that is sort of implicit with that is that you discourage people from doing that, and we absolutely must avoid it. But I do agree with you, actually, I do agree with you that people should be innocent until proven guilty. And a culture of witch hunt of people before they've been proven guilty, I think, is absolutely wrong.
Person in the very back there.
I think it's important that we don't blame the police and the Crown Prosecution Service for failings in a time of austerity. A lot of the evidence that's not disclosed is because volumes of internet accessible data, and they aren't given the resources to actually sift through it. So I think we need to consider why these cases are going pear-shaped.
So you weren't critical when this evidence came up just before the trial that hadn't been revealed before? You think that was endemic in the way that the police are structured, the amount of time and money they have to spend?
I agree.
You agree with that? And have you spoken already? I'll just take one more point from you. Yes.
Yeah, I think both parties need protection here. It's a very sensitive circumstance. The accused shouldn't be named until proven guilty, but secondly, the naming and shaming of false accusers, the last thing we need to do is make the culture of fear in bringing a rape case to trial. That's the last thing we need to do, is to increase that culture of fear.
And you, sir, over there. Yes.
Surely the CPS should be brought to book for bringing this evidence at the last minute. It's not just discovered. Surely it's there all the time, and they want to withhold it to get a prosecution going.
And you, sir, in the middle, in the back there, yes?
Yeah, I'd like to say that everyone in this audience, if you was accused of rape and having to go through a court case, an horrendous court case, with media on your family, media on you all the time, and then you was proven not guilty, you've got to live with that for the rest of your life. Can everyone imagine what that's going to be like? Going down the supermarket, oh, he's the person that was... You know, it's easily get tarnished. I certainly agree that you can't go naming and shaming the people that falsely accusing you, because, yes, there will be a witch hunt for them as well. It's a very difficult subject, but certainly...
And the woman there in the fourth row.
I'm just wondering whether you would include people accused of child abuse. Would you expect them not to be named as well? Or is that a different matter?
What do you think?
Well, I think these people are accused of crimes, and in the ordinary way, people that are accused of crimes are generally named in the press.
And the woman over there.
Surely, if you want to protect the men in case they're going to be falsely accused, the way round it is what's happening with the black cab driver, where he's now known, and it's come, the other cases have been asked to be taken into consideration before his release now. So at that stage, once somebody has been proven guilty and they're inside for the crime, surely then at that stage other people will know who he is because it will be public knowledge, and then they can come forward and ask for the case to be taken into consideration.
Which, if he's,
it protects both.
If he's been found guilty, yes.
Yes, if he's been found guilty.
But that is the case for having people named, because that particular case with that cab driver, he had drugged women that got into his cab, then he'd sexually assaulted them, and by default, they didn't have memory of it. But then many more women came forward before actually that case had been convicted, because they had had that similar experience and they suddenly saw the pattern of behaviour, because they had woken up having been drugged, having got into a taxi and been offered some champagne by a cabbie, apparently celebrating a lottery win, and suddenly they woke up and what had happened to them. And so I would say to the gentleman in the audience, I understand this is a sensitive issue, but as well as putting yourself in the shoes of somebody that is accused in that way, also put yourself in the shoes of the person who is raped, a man or a woman, and they have to live with that for the rest of their life, and far too few of them currently get any justice whatsoever.
All right. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to take this question quickly round the table from Benjamin Davenport Lawton, please.
Was it right that Westminster Council refused to erect a statue of Margaret Thatcher?
Yes, there was announced there was going to be a statue of Margaret Thatcher in Westminster, and they, for various reasons, civil disobedience, vandalism, they said, it wasn't. But of course, there's a question whether there should be one in Grantham, which is her hometown. What? Anyway, I'm going to ask the panel. Should there be a statue? What do you think?
Well, look, if the good people of Grantham want a statue of Margaret Thatcher, then I think, then I think you should have one. But
what about in Westminster, along with Churchill and Mandela and all the other figures that are in...
Well, let's just say I certainly won't be paying homage to the to the statue of Margaret Thatcher. So I sort of support the decision of Westminster Council.
Justin Greening.
I think it's a real shame, actually. I think it would have been great to have a statue. I think, whatever you might think of the policy, she was our first female Prime Minister, and we're celebrating 100 years since women first got the vote. And I think these are important moments, and she was an important person in this country's history for men and especially, though, for women. And I think we should have had a statue of her.
Do you think it'll be overturned?
I hope so.
And not the statue, I mean...
I think this is about our history.
All right. Very briefly, John Mann, we've got to go round quickly because we're coming to the end.
Well, there's one in the Palace of Westminster, and when Margaret Thatcher unveiled it, there was a little lad from one of my mining villages, a 7-year-old lad, down in Parliament, and he ran over to her and he says, well, we don't like you where we come from, so it can cut both ways. Local decision-making, but there certainly won't be one in any of the former mining constituencies, I can assure you.
Jo Swinson.
Well, I'm not a fan of Margaret Thatcher's politics, but I was born in 1980, and when I was growing up as a little girl, it never crossed my mind that a woman couldn't be Prime Minister. And I didn't realise, actually, how unusual that was at the time. There are far too few statues and pictures of women within the grounds of Westminster. When you go around the corridors, you look around and it is blokes, blokes, blokes. So if we can't have a statue of the first woman Prime Minister, I think that is actually a very sad thing, regardless of her politics.
No. And Tim Stanley, iconoclastic on this one?
They should definitely have a statue to Margaret Thatcher, and in the spirit of Thatcherism. It should be made of iron. It should be value for money, and it should have a massive handbag to beat any protesters or vandals who go near.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Our hour's up. Now, next Thursday, I said earlier, we're going to be in Darlington. Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, will be one of those on the panel in Darlington. The week after that, we're going to be in Yeovil. The number to call, 0330 123 9988. If you'd like to be in either of those audiences, or you can go to the website for Question Time and apply there, which is just as effective. If you want to have your say on any of the many topics we've discussed tonight, Question Time Extra Time is on 5 Live right now, and if you want to watch it, press the red button, you get it on television, or go to the BBC iPlayer. But here, my thanks to all of you on this panel, and to all of you who came here to Grantham tonight to take part in the programme. Until next Thursday, good night.
The BBC's World Affairs editor John Simpson talks democracy. Joining Andrew Neil, This Week follows in just a moment here on BBC One.